This is Steve Zeltzer, and I'm here in Golden Gate Park in front of the San Francisco Botanical Gardens, and we're going to be having a walkthrough to learn about how Golden Gate Park is being privatized and the role of nonprofits in this privatization project that's going on here in Golden Gate Park.
I am an environmental activist living at Ocean Beach in San Francisco, and a long-time Golden Gate Park goer. I've been coming to the Arboretum for 30 years, I would say, and seen a lot of changes happen in Golden Gate Park.
I'm Harry Parisner. I'm a longtime resident of the Inner Sunset and a longer time resident of San Francisco. And I'm an artist, writer, and photographer, among other things. And I've been following this problem of increasing encroachment of the wealthy upon our resources for over a decade now. It's become more and more obvious. Before, they were in their little conclaves and, in Pacific Heights, they left us alone, but now they've decided they want every place.
We're at the entrance of the Arboretum, and we're about to walk inside, where we'll have to show identification if we don't want to pay the fee. Once upon a time, a long time ago, like 20 years ago, we could come here with our guests, with our family, with friends from out of town, and all this was wide open. You just walked in and you were able to stroll around like it was a park. It should be. It's part of the park, and enjoy the plants, enjoy the gardens, and there was no need for anyone to take admission. We didn't have to have these booths set up. The area of the Arboretum was not fenced off like it is now. You could come in on the side here. And all that has changed over the last few years. Now there's gates, there's fences, there's taking admission fees, having to show your identification. And if you have friends from out of town or family from out of town, well, you're going to have to pay. You're going to have to pay a lot to get in.
Are you a gardener?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. Are you a volunteer gardener?
I am a volunteer.
Okay.
Yeah. And
How long have you been here?
about 15 years.
So as we come into the entrance of the Arboretum, we're going to have to show our IDs. Does everyone here have a San Francisco ID? Otherwise, you won't be able to come in with us.
I don't.
Hey guys, what's going on?
Hi.
We're just doing a survey of the park.
Okay. Survey? It's just personal survey or surveying people?
Yeah.
Well, not surveying the people inside here?
No, we're just walking through the park.
Okay, so this is your own personal thing.
Yeah, just our group.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
You're not
we're-
interviewing other people.
No, we're.
Are you do you work for the park?
I work here.
Okay.
And Harry, so as we come into the gardens, we're going to come into the new demonstration garden area, which used to be a really lovely green spot. There was previously very little concrete here, and since they have converted this area into a place to hold corporate events and do fundraising and stage whatever promotions that is that they want to stage, they filled all this in with concrete. This used to be plants and grass, and it seems counterintuitive for the botanical gardens to do that. There used to be individual gardens over here, a Japanese garden, a Chinese garden. Someone's husband had a memorial garden for her. She was a long-time volunteer here. There was in this area here various structures, I guess, little shelters where people could sit. There was plants. It was like a grotto, and that's all been wiped out. It was just taken down to the ground.
Well, was there any discussion or to the public about the removal of the gardens here? I mean, there was a Japanese memorial garden from contributed plants from Japanese community, American community in San Francisco.
Yes, not that I recall. Basically, the Botanical Society decided to call this a plant museum, and they had sole discretionary charge of it. It seemed like it was no longer a park or a botanical gardens open to the public. It was a plant museum, and I don't know if you know it, but they hold big fundraising and corporate events here out on the main lawn. They put up a big tent and marquees. They do the same thing here, and very wealthy people, well-heeled crowd comes and attends these big events. They close off the arboretum to have it. They have them at night often. So in any case, the decision was made that this was, I think they didn't like the fact that sometimes homeless people perhaps would come in and get some shelter, have a seat, and have some respite. That was not really in their plans. So they wiped it all out and put in these concrete.
And ever since Golden Gate Park was established, which was not by a unanimous vote of the Board of Supervisors, there has been a struggle between the wealthy people who want to control the park for their own, enlightenment, their own edification, their own advancement, and ordinary people who wanted to use it. Here we are in Golden Gate Park, and Golden Gate Park was established not by a unanimous vote of the Board of Supervisors, but a majority, and ever since then, the rich people and wealthy people and influential people have been trying to find a way to make Golden Gate Park serve their interests. For example, down here in the back, if you take a look around here, this is the last time you'll see this greenery, because they're planning on spending over $1 million for a new entrance, which will give the Botanical Garden Society a new entrance to the park. Now, if you start at the park at the edge of the Panhandle, you'll see the Stanyon Edge project, which cost over $1 million. And essentially widen the paths, like something like roads, probably for these jitneys to go through that they hire for $40 an hour to bicycle through. And the bike rental is right there where Food Not Bombs once was. They have these lights in there, lots of LED lights to deter people, color lights of the fountain. When you go on along Lincoln, you'll see the Hank Recycling Center. And that's now a gated community garden. And the same woman who is behind this entrance was also behind that privatization. And now before it was a thriving place which actually had community. They Park and Rec Commission and others decided it was a non-conforming use, but somehow a Ferris wheel is a conforming use. If you go in to McLaren Lodge, they had 150th anniversary of Golden Gate Park, which they neglected to tell anybody except a few elites was happening when they planned it. And they put in a trailer there selling swag. Unfortunately, the anniversary was canceled, but they've been distributing the events throughout the years, including showing the AIDS quilt most recently. 420 is an event at Hippie Hill that they can't control. They love to control, and they finally put a fence around it, and they're marketing out, and now it's become much more obnoxious and nowhere near as fun. It used to be actually the world's largest, greatest spontaneous anarchist event, maybe except other than the Rainbow Gathering, because all these people would show up just for one day and not causing anybody any trouble other than some traffic problems. But the city government didn't like that because they couldn't license it and make money off of it. With the Conservatory of Flowers, you see the lighting that goes on there at nights. They were planning on, the Parks Alliance was planning on privatizing. They already privatized it and gave it to Parks Alliance in 2004, and then they were trying to make it more commercial, but they had $1 million deficit, so they decided to sell it to the Botanical Garden Society for $1 million. Now that apparently they're not going to spend $1 million to transfer it, but I somehow feel they'll get the money some way or another. New tennis center had cost overruns of $400,000. Now the Gus Goldman family is not going to come through with the $400,000 for the cost overruns. That again was a project of a woman who lives in the Inner Sunset. These people in the Inner Sunset, they also tried to put in a community benefits district unsuccessfully. And they came up with this guy, Ike Kwok, at the Academy of Sciences, and they're very much for controlling this neighborhood. In fact, on the Neighborhood Business Association, two of the members are the Academy of Sciences and UCSF, which is also trying to do a deal, which is doing a deal which is going to destroy the neighborhood essentially by putting in a much larger hospital and also attracting a lot more workers without the housing and without the transportation for them. Oh, there's two women. There's one woman that's called Martha Ehrenfeld, and she's a tennis fanatic. And the other woman is Andrea Jadwin. And they've been advocating for gentrification and shutting people out for years now, and turning trying to commercialize the neighborhood and turn it into someplace they think is cutesy. They were also responsible for these ugly so-called parklets that were put in at a huge cost to taxpayers with these rusting metal stands that you can see here in the Inner Sunset. And then behind our scenes, and there hasn't been a meeting since like 2018. And then the projection equipment didn't work. And of course, when they set it out, they don't set it out and tell you what they're actually doing. They always say like improvements.
Now, isn't the Parks and Recreation Commission supposed to have some responsibility for what goes on in the parks?
The Park and Rec Commission are appointed by the mayor, and they are glad-handers and people that are there because they want to get free tickets to outside lands, free tickets to games, lots of people adulating them. One of these guys for the Plumbers Union, he made the most amazing comments about the Ferris wheel, and as though they can't understand anything about the environment. They don't understand anything about parks. What they do is understanding about is getting a lot of attention for themselves, and that's why all these commissions, and that's why they're failures, because you don't appoint people that are actually knowledgeable or actually care about parks, or the police brutality or anything else, or the arts. You just appoint people that are well connected.
But nonprofit that's been here, that has millions of dollars, there's been a discussion of scandal, corruption, kickbacks.
Parks Alliance. Well, Parks Alliance claims to have a history of 50 years, even though they've only maybe it's 10 to 15. And they were Parks Trust and then Neighborhood Parks Council, and they combined. And then Connie Chan has been very good about pushing them about this thing about the Ferris wheel. And the Ferris wheel is supposed to go, and then a month before it goes, they said we need to have it here for 4 more years. Not just 1 more year, but 4 more years, because the intention was always to make the Ferris wheel permanent. Let me continue. When we go to this Spreckles Temple of Music, and we have this attempt by this guy who runs this nonprofit in Marin called Illuminate, and he wanted to put a Harvey Milk motto on the band shell, and the Historical Preservation Commission vetoed that, so he got it. Next year he went and got an artist from Oakland to make a type of sculptures to surround the Sir Francis Scott Key plinth, and then he was able to successfully lift every voice. And now he's also got the contract for these concerts, which, we don't know how they choose the people for the concerts.
Executive CEO of this Illuminate group, who is basically funded by some very wealthy people.
So then we come to the DeYoung over here. Everyone should read the book by Sean Willsey, Oh, the Glory of It All. His Dee Dee Willsey's stepson. She married into incredible wealth, and now she's supporting Trump. And the DeYoung, she kind of turns the DeYoung into a little private, decorating business. They frame her pictures. I heard there was all kinds of scandals about it. Artist Judy Chicago built a scaffolding and released all this colored powder. It was very unsuitable for the environment. There was no discussion whatsoever. None of these so-called nonprofits have any meetings with locals. And you can't even bring somebody, if you say your friend is visiting on a free day at the Academy of Sciences, which they hardly ever have, you have to show you're from that particular zip code. At the zoo, you have to show you're San Franciscan, otherwise you can't get it on the free day. And the idea is to bring somebody in on a free day that you pay for your friend, essentially. And the Academy also has these huge parties on Thursday nights. Very loud. Also the band shell new sound system that was put in by Ben Davis, that's also extremely loud. The band shell is one thing, but the Ferris wheel across from it is another, and that was put in without any community discussion, although Martha Ehrenfeld knew about it and lauded it in advance, because I saw that news article published after the fact. And there's no environmental consideration. In fact, the Academy is wants to team up with the Ferris wheel, to do like Thursday night you come in and then you go take the Ferris wheel also. The tea garden was always public property, and I believe there was union members taking the donations, so-called donations. It started at 50 cents. Now it's over the top. The Recreation and Park Department and Historical Preservation Commission, as mentioned, are completely complacent and go along with everything and never go against anything. And there's also horrible lighting now on that Spreckles music structure. And there's $1 million pagoda repair on the tea garden. You can see the pagoda's kind of wrapped Christo style, and they were charging $1 surcharge for that. And Parks Alliance organized a group called Friends of the Tea Garden, which has no members as far as I know, and also raises money for the tea garden, but also really for Parks Alliance. And they have a lot of these friends groups. The Hall of Flowers over here behind us is unaffordable for local groups. And there's also, all this new signage was paid for by taxpayers. These entrance kiosks were paid for by taxpayers, and a large part is destroying the demonstration garden and also this new nursery they're putting in, and the $1.1 million fence that surrounds this place are all paid for by taxpayers. If you go into the back, you see this fountain. They sell these funerary plaques that are in the ground. So and so love the garden, and then they've got benches, and the benches also are for sale, and the benches are only like for 5 years or 10 years, and then they put in another bench. So bye loved one. Kind of like moving bodies out of the cemetery. The demonstration garden was a great place. We could go in there to the right. There were some pavilions to sit and so forth. That was all destroyed and made the celebration garden so they could sell it out for corporate events. And again, hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money went into that, but there was not a single meeting. The Center for Sustainable Gardening was supposed to be the top of the hill, but they downsized it and moved it down to where they're putting that nursery now. And the gardens around there were destroyed without any public discussion. There were never any meetings. There's a huge acres in the back there that they appropriated with a fence, and there's really no reason for that to be part of that. They're not doing anything with it, but they won't let us do it because it's simple, like the Monopoly board. And we used to be able to come in here, in the back behind the flowers some days on weekend, and summer evenings until 9, because the park personnel wouldn't shut it. And now we can't do that anymore. We have to pay for our rates and our guests, and the final indignity is that they have this surge pricing, which means they can raise entrance rates by 50% whenever they want to. And they're going to be planning more and more commercial events. Flower piano, which is very destructive to the environment. You can just see that by the fact they have put these cords around there, and the fact they removed a lot of foliage to widen the paths for that. With their $15 nighttime piano concerts, that'll be nothing compared to what's coming in the future. And I'm sure they're planning, light show at night, and during the winter, and all the trees in the arboretum and so forth. Further out, we have the colonization by the Outside Land Festival. There was no consultation with neighbors before that festival was brought in. Once brought in, it was impossible to get out, and they used the rationale of raising money, even though, the city has, something like a $13 billion budget, and they don't need that money, and it deprives the neighbors of use for a week. The horseback riding concession is out there. That's very expensive. Only like many of these things, like the tennis center and the horseback and this horseback riding and so forth. If you have a lot of disposable income, you could do it otherwise. The soccer fields and the Fisher's Field Foundation out there at Ocean Beach, that was another huge controversy with people objecting to the toxic being introduced into the soil with this astroturf. And also the massive amount of lighting, and Connie Chan was complaining about the huge amount of lighting in this park, which is very disruptive to animal life. But you have to understand that these people have decided to turn the city into a theme park for techies and tourists without any discussion, and their view is their way or the highway or the freeway, and there's no discussion, and they don't really care what you think because they have the power and there's no alternative. Essentially, the money for the Ferris wheel was originally supposed to go all to Parks Alliance. They don't pay any rent for that, putting that in there. And then they decided, okay, only the first $200,000 to pay for the celebration that got canceled is going to go to Parks Alliance, and then the rest of it's going to go to the Recreation and Park Department. And it's $18 for a 6-minute ride and $50 with a 2-person minimum, I think it's 18-minute ride in the VIP gondola. And these are very similar to what they use for public transportation in La Paz, Bolivia, or in Medellin, Colombia, but those are like 35 cents to ride. This is not public transportation. It doesn't belong in a park. It doesn't add anything to the park. What it does is, their idea of everything has to be commercialized, everything has to be monetized. Recreation and Park Department has to be a enterprise agency which is intent upon renting things out and not serving the public, because they don't really care about the public. The public are just something they have to pretend to care about. And minorities are something you put in your posters like the Botanical Garden Society does, but you don't actually see them there unless they're wealthy.
And the employees here, many of the employees now do not work for the city, the public parks. They work for this nonprofit, so they're not public workers anymore.
Well, it's hard to tell. There are something like 9 to 11 gardeners that kept, claiming like if we don't have the entrance charges, we're going to, if we can't charge entrance, we're going to have to cut gardeners, which was nonsense, of course, because you don't do a budget that way. You do a budget in totality, and when you cut something, you cut the stuff that you don't need to have that's superfluous, but they don't want to do that because it's all crony capitalism.
Should we walk to the fair?
We're here in the music concourse of Golden Gate Park, and in front of the SkyStar Ferris wheel. And I'm not saying that Mark Buell, the president of the Recreation and Park Commission, is getting paid by SkyStar LLC of St. Louis, Missouri, but how do we know he is not? SkyStar doesn't have to reveal how much money it pays or to whom. It's a limited liability company, and its contractual arrangements are private. There is, in fact, no written contract between SkyStar and the San Francisco Recreation and Parks Commission or Department. When the Recreation and Parks gave the wheel a choice location in the music concourse, rent-free for a year, there was not even a memorandum of understanding. How and by whom exactly was the determination made to contract with SkyStar to put the observation wheel in Golden Gate Park? Who determined the ticket price, and who decided that the initial split for full-price adult tickets would be $17 to SkyStar, $1 to the San Francisco Park Alliance, with $0 going to the city? Was there any consideration of SkyStar paying rent to the city for operating 3 different concessions, food, drink, souvenirs, and the wheel in a premier public space? There was not, apparently. There is, to say the least, a lack of transparency in the contractual arrangements between SkyStar LLC, the Recreation and Parks Commission, and the nonprofit Parks Alliance. On March 3, 2021, the Historic Preservation Commission held a hearing on whether or not to extend the wheel's stay in Golden Gate Park to 5 years from the original 1-year term. Mark Buell, President of the Recreation and Parks Commission, had read into the record his strong support for the 4-year extension of the SkyStar wheel. Phil Ginsberg, the general manager of the Recreation and Parks Department, was the person most responsible for bringing SkyStar wheel to the music concourse. Now, I'm not saying that Ginsberg is getting kickbacks from SkyStar, but how do we know he's not? According to the Budget and Legislative Analyst Report to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, the vendor, this is a quote, the vendor was selected on a sole source basis for a 1-year term because competitive bidding was considered impractical and or impossible by the Recreation and Parks Department due to the limited time between deciding to include an observation wheel in the 150th park celebration and the community event date in April 2020. This shows a lack of planning and a disregard for the public interest. We did not need a Ferris wheel to celebrate the 150th anniversary of Golden Gate Park. We are now stuck with the SkyStar wheel for 5 years for the benefit of an out-of-town vendor. Speaking a little bit about the San Francisco Parks Alliance, let me just say that the Board of Supervisors Government Oversight and Audit Committee has voted unanimously to subpoena financial records of the transactions between the Recreation and Parks Department and the San Francisco Parks Alliance. In the words of Supervisor Connie Chan, I have identified that the sub-account practice is not appropriate and problematic. So we have yet to see what sub-accounts may yet exist for the Department of Public Works at San Francisco Parks Alliance in this Recreation and Parks Department. Yeah, there's more than one city department involved. It was, in fact, the sub-accounts at the Department of Public Works that San Francisco Parks Alliance was holding that were uncovered by the FBI that helped bring down the Public Works Director, Mohammed Nuru. So, however it turns out, we need to hopefully see what's in those financial records, and we need certainly to clear up the appearance of impropriety in these dealings.
And didn't they also threaten Connie Chan? Why don't you talk about that? When she began to say that there should be an audit, they sent a letter saying you're not going to get a project in your district.
The president of the San Francisco Parks Alliance made a threat that they would withdraw funding for a playground that was in Connie Chan's district. But Mark Buell, the president of the Rec and Parks Commission, quickly acted to say that that funding was already secured and there was nothing that the Parks Alliance could do to withdraw the funds. And I believe that Connie wanted an apology. I'm not sure if she got one.
What does that tell you about the Parks Alliance?
It tells us that they are serving in a role where not all that they do has been subject to public scrutiny or to public input, and that behind the scenes they are getting paid and by their donors, by wealthy people, and they are hiring contractors and subcontractors to do work in the park. So they are operating as almost like a parallel agency to the Recreation and Parks Department, but without the same accountability and the same budget process.
And these workers here, they're private workers working for who? Nonprofit or the company?
Yeah, they are private workers working for SkyStar LLC, and they have a number of concessions there, as I remarked. Yeah, and none of that money goes to the city at all, even though they have this premier location in our music concourse, possibly one of the world's premier public spaces, and they are getting it rent-free and keeping all the money. This is privatization. This is what the San Francisco Recreation and Parks Department and Phil Ginsburg, the general manager, likes to call a public-private partnership. But it seems to me that it's the private part that's getting the lion's share of the deal. About the Outside Lands Festival, we are giving over a large section of our park that is fenced off, not for a week, but for 3 weeks. The public is not allowed in there while they construct their facilities and construct their stages and so on. And this is a private company that, yes, they're sharing some of the revenue with the city, but they are making the money. And it is not a good deal for the city. It's not protecting the interests of the public. Like I used to say, yeah, give me a piece of the park. You know, rent-free. I can make some money too. I'll share a little bit with you.
But there are 80 billionaires in San Francisco. There's massive wealth. They could be forced to pay for the cost. When they say there's no money for gardeners in Golden Gate Park, where's the money going?
Yes, the argument about the gardeners is one that comes up where the artificial turf situation is concerned as well. It's important for us to have gardeners, to fund gardeners. This is putting people first. This is putting our citizens and our residents first. We need gardeners in the park. We don't need, and those are good paying union jobs as they should be, and they're good paying city jobs as they should be. And we don't need nonprofit agencies to be supplying the labor that San Franciscans deserve to have for their parks.
You see that as a threat to the future of public services?
You know, that is an interesting question. In San Francisco, there's no question that many of the functions of government, as in the Tenderloin cleanup and the nonprofits being hired there, that the privatization is extending to that realm, to the realm of all city services, where we get nonprofits with highly paid executives who are given contracts by the city to fund their operations, and they pay people, you know, the minimum to carry out work that should really be being done by city employees.
The privatization we've seen, the classic example of this is the privatization of Golden Gate Park, this jewel of a park that sits in the middle of San Francisco. We've seen a number of incidents in recent years in which either the Recreation and Park Department under General Director Phil Ginsburg is either selling access to different vendors, and you know, some of that has always gone on a little bit, but it's ramped up. They have an actual program to try and sell access to different vendors. So you had the example of the Ferris wheel near the museums, where initially the Ferris wheel was supposed to be there for a period of 2 years, but then COVID hit, and so they had to shut it down. And so then once kind of they started relaxing some of the rules around COVID, they started the Ferris wheel once again. there was only about a year left on that contract at that point. So instead of just extending it for another year, the Rec and Park Department just simply authorized it for 5 years. And there's actually laws in San Francisco about how you can authorize private vendors in the park. It actually has to go through the Board of Supervisors in most cases. And the discussion of whether to extend it for 5 years or 1 year hinged on the definition of the word temporary. So it just shows you how they really try to manipulate language and take advantage of loopholes in the law. And they basically decided that 5 years is temporary. And so they were allowed to do it without going to the Board of Supervisors because in their view, it was temporary. And because temporary wasn't really defined anywhere, there was opposition to this, but in the end, they just kind of rammed it through. They also have done a similar thing. Not far, I live in the outer Sunset of San Francisco. There's a horse concession. They decided to bring in horse stables and put in horses there. And San Francisco does have a history of having horses in the park for a number of years, but we haven't had them in San Francisco in the park for almost, I think, like 17 years. But suddenly, again, Rec and Park decided we want horses. And they gave a sweetheart contract deal to a vendor. They didn't put it out for private bid. They were able to get away with that because they said, oh, it's just a pilot program. It's a pilot program. It's going to last. Initially, it was supposed to last a year. But then in the middle of that, COVID hit. So they said, oh, well, we have to shut it down. So we'll just start the pilot program again once we relax the rules around COVID. Well, so, and make a long story short, this 1 year pilot program is now going on about 3.5 years. And after a pilot program expires, you're supposed to then go through an a request for proposal process, find a vendor, they bid on it, you get the best deal, the lowest contract. And this is never happened. They are just simply making up the rules as they go along. And, you think, well, horses rides in the park. It sounds like it could be okay. But it's actually a fairly expensive proposition. It costs $80 an hour to ride one of these horses. And just down Route 35, there's another vendor that does it for about half the amount. So somehow this sweetheart contract has been able to continue. It's for a very expensive service, $80 an hour. When I go over there and see what kind of cars are pulling in, it's basically, a lot of Mercedes and Lexuses and very expensive cars pulling in and giving. It's basically about a lot of little girls that take horse ride lessons there and ride around in circles with someone who knows how to make the horses behave. So that's another example of the type of privatization that we're seeing, where you take a section of the park, a public park, and you sequester it off for the private use of in this case, fairly wealthy clientele. One of the times I walked through this area where they were doing the horse rides, there's a big corral there, and they told me I had to leave. And I said, well, what do you mean? This is a public park. They said, sorry, we have rented this area, and only the people we want gain access to it. And so this is, and also the other part of it is that of course, if you have horses living in the park, because they created these temporary stables for these horses, you have to have people living in the park in order to take care of these horses. So there are 3 RVs that are perched about a 10-minute walk from my house, where people are now living in these RVs. And so during a time when they are, consistently pushing the homeless out of the park and saying, you're not allowed to live inside Golden Gate Park. This is a public park. No one can live here. They actually have people living there. One of the people living there has filed a labor law violation because they were being treated poorly. So, I mean, there's a lot of issues around when you just kind of make up the rules, privatize a certain part of the park, give it to a vendor where there's no RFP process, there's really no oversight. Recreation and Park Department is just simply making up the rules they want and just privatizing.